Welcome to The Art of Growth, where we use the Enneagram and the best tools we can find to help individuals and organizations navigate transformation and transition. I am Jim Zartman, and today we have a part 2 of sorts today. If you have not listened to our episode on the Enneagram and culture, I'd recommend you go back and listen to that first. This is a bit of a follow-up conversation, and we're talking about race and cultural overlay during a tense time. And the reason we're talking about this is not a departure from our other work. This is very much in line with what we already are a part of and believe in, which is that the Enneagram does not go far enough if it's only about personal transformation. It has to move from self-awareness to social awareness. We are in this thing together, and we are part of a broader context, and what impacts a part of it does impact the whole. So we want to get to this subject today, and I am so thankful for our panelists, and you'll get to hear more about them in a little bit. Before we get started, a reminder that the hub of all of our work is at theartofgrowth.org, and you can go there and look at information on group coaching. We're doing a 3-month program. You can contact me, Jim, about that, and we'll have a 15-minute discovery call, get to know you a little bit, and place you in the right group. We have individual coaching. Joel Hubbard is one of the best individual Enneagram coaches around. And if you'd like to bring us into your organization to deal with change management and team dynamics, Suzanne York is our team member who is amazing in that space. For those of you who are interested in interfaith work or interspiritual connection, we'd like to invite you to join the International Day of Meditation and Prayer Facebook page. That's what's called, International Day of Meditation and Prayer. It's put on by the School of Conscious Living, and we're going to have a special day, International Day of Meditation and Prayer, on July 9th. So once again, thank you so much for joining us, and I'm so glad you're joining us for this conversation to hear this today. So this was recorded over Zoom and not into a studio, but I have cleaned up the audio as best I can, and you should have no trouble absorbing the content from this time. And I hope that's what you do. My heart is that you would be receptive to what needs to be heard today. Not defensive, to lay all that down, and to open to your heart and your mind and your body, as we say, all 3 centers, to receive and to take in from our panelists today. Thank you for joining us. Let's get on with it.
Well, I am so thrilled and honored to have some of you, my friends, to be part of this podcast on social awareness and race. And what I like to do is just begin by having each of you introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about you, what you do. We'd love to hear about that.
My name is Deborah Egerton, sometimes known as Dr. E, because my last name is Egerton, but because I spend most of my life teaching the Enneagram. I am a diversity, equity, and inclusion practitioner, have been for over 20 years. And I use the Enneagram primarily as sort of the cornerstone of doing the work that I do. I have been doing this for it feels like for as long as I can remember. But what I can say is that if there was ever a time, a prescient time, where the Enneagram and the work that I do come together in such a beautiful way, it's now. And so I'm very excited to be talking about this.
I'll go. I'm Tanisha Dixon. I'm not a doctor, but I am proud to be Black. I think as we talk about introduction, something I think that's helpful to understand is I am Black. I'm mixed, so I'm also Asian. And I grew up in an area where the majority of the population was white. And for a long time, I really rejected my Black identity, and just it was not something that I enjoyed or liked about myself. But I began to embrace it probably my late teens, maybe like 19, 20, 21, is when I realized I had curly hair. It wasn't just frizz, and that being Black was something to be proud of. And I am a pastor. I work with kids and young adults, which is an interesting age range. And yeah.
Well, my name is Milton Stewart. I am an elementary educator for a school in Memphis, one of the poorest zip codes in the state of Tennessee. Love my kids, love their neighborhood. I'm also the podcast host of Do It for the Gram, an Enneagram podcast. And I also have a business called Kaizen Careers Coaching and Consulting, where I use the Enneagram to help organizations and individuals improve themselves. And so that is me.
I am so grateful again to have each of you here with me, and I consider this a treat and again as an honor. We're talking about a difficult subject. We're talking about one that I'm asking you to talk about. I'm sure for you've had to do this so many times in the recent days and the recent weeks, and maybe for you most of your life. So I appreciate that, and would like to start by asking you maybe to describe how you're thinking, what you're thinking about these days, how you're feeling right now, and just whatever comes to mind and heart. Love to hear that.
Well, Joel, this is a very, very difficult time for me. There is a combination of the desire of my heart to go out and do this work and to help to inform minds and open hearts. And then there is the heaviness and the pain of being a Black person. It's very difficult to show up business as usual, just doing what you do, when your heart hurts the way that Black hearts are hurting right now. And I think that something that you will find is a universal response is that we as a people are exhausted. We're just tired. We're tired of it. I had an experience just last night where I don't live in a neighborhood where I hear gunshots. It's more of a suburban, rural type area. But I thought I heard gunshots last night, and I sat up in the bed, and because my husband usually goes out at 4 o'clock in the morning to do his morning run, the first thing that I did was I reached over to make sure he was there. We've been through the whole horrific police taking him down and handcuffing him. He's an older man, he's graying at the temples. He's a retired colonel from the military, and he's a physician. He's a doctor, but he's a chief medical officer of a hospital. So there's no amount of education. There's no socioeconomic level. There is nothing that you can do as a Black person that is going to protect you from being put in harm's way just because of the color of your skin. And I can tell you, it's exhausting.
Wow, thank you. Tanisha.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I was just telling someone who had one of my friends who on Facebook was like, please, my Black friends, tell me. I want to learn about what it's like to be racist against. It was a very hard, his heart is in the right place, And I had just responded, was here's some good books you can read, but please know, I can't speak for everyone on your friends list or everyone you knows, but everyone but we are being pulled and forced to educate in this moment. And it's so complicated and exhausting because not only do I have to work on my own inner healing and continue to allow myself to try to remember the good things about being Black in a difficult time like this, I have to deal with people I love who are saying radically inappropriate things right now, who are, focused so much on the politics and all that stuff. I have to deal with going to work and still trying to maintain some level of normalcy. And in addition to that, you want me to recount to you the numerous moments I've had, where I've been the victim of racism. That's a lot to ask. It was funny because I got immediate pushback. It was oh, it's so sad. You guys keep saying that you don't have energy. And I think I find myself starting to get like a little mad because I am tired and I'm just trying to help people to see, and that it's like, even in saying something that I thought was kind and rather judicial, was still getting a response of like, well, you should be like, it just, the defensiveness, and that's exhausting. But on the other hand, I find myself really excited about the progress that is being made in the anti-racism work, and the minds that are being opened, the hearts that are receptive, that have never been receptive before. I think that is so exciting, where I literally never thought that people that I know and love would be willing to come to me and say, hey, how have I done things that have perpetuated this in your life, right? Or if there's anything I can do, like, I just have never had people do that for me. And so I am very excited about that, but it is exhausting to have to exist in this space for this particular length of time, and all that's being kind of demanded of us. I think that's kind of where I'm at.
Quite heavy. I've been tired, really, really tired last month. And like Dr. Egerton was saying, it's hard I'm trying to do my work, trying to build a business, trying to do the full-time job I also have, and trying to deal with the weight of all of this that's going on. It's so hard trying to do inner work, like Tanisha said, where it's like I'm actually trying to do inner healing, trying to sit with myself, sit with the pain, sit with the anger, sit with being overwhelmed. It's really tough. It's really difficult. And I don't feel as productive as I typically would be, but I'm learning to not judge myself and just give myself space and time to rest, and to constantly have moments of like down periods where I'm just like unplugged from everything, because it is heavy. I've been overwhelmed. I've been extremely angry. I've cried. I've been sad. I've been scared. Something that Dr. E said, and this is what happens in our minds. And I think we alluded to this like on the part one we did last year, but like racial battle fatigue, like that stuff's so real, because there's like this natural fear inside already. For instance, she's like she said before, like she thought she heard gunshots. So automatically she was checking to see like, is her husband okay? Is he there? A tree, like part of a tree in my backyard fell, and it's a pretty big part. You know what popped in my mind? Was somebody hung from my tree, or did they hang some from my tree in my neighborhood that I need to go look at and see? So that's what happens in my mind. That's always a running thing. And my neighborhood is mixed. So I have white and black people, and I think that's a great thing. But at the same time, I do understand that some people may look at me a total different way than the way that like you would see a regular just human. And so it does bring fear to my mind, because it's like, are they out there plotting? Do they see me like taking out my trash and think, I got something for him to scare him away? Like, I don't know. So that's how it's been. It's been heavy. It's been overwhelming, but numb at the same time. It's just an overwhelmingly part of being numb. It's a combination of both. There is some hope, but I think we'll talk about that as you ask more questions. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you. I really appreciate you sharing your hearts. I think it might be helpful just to sort of set the stage, maybe to give some definitions around what bias is, what prejudice is, racism, systemic racism. Maybe talk a bit about that. What does that mean? What is that? So I'd love to hear from each of you on that as well.
Dr. E can probably give a really, really good, well-defined way. So the way that I understand systemic racism, besides the fact of experiencing it, is that there are structures, laws, rules, unspoken expectations that rule our country and our culture. And it is literally in almost every facet of our government and the way that we live our lives and our economy. And so it impacts us in such a negative way. It keeps people who are poor, who are Black, either in prison. This is one of them. Prison industrial complex. That's one system that's created so that Black people who may have had the same exact issue or charge as a white person gets way more time in prison. or they get time and the white person doesn't get time. They did that in the 80s with drugs, with crack cocaine. If you smoked it a certain way, then you got so many years. If you did it the other way, it's not that big deal. But the one way that in black neighborhoods it was shown up, that punishment was like tenfold way more than the one that most white people did, the drug. So it's like systems like that are in place. There's laws that are very specific and pertain to certain people that only impact this group of people. And also our judicial system, we understand that it's unfortunately, and I think and I hope and I pray that we're getting better, because I do see cops being actually arrested for brutality now, and, because this wasn't happening, a year ago. It wasn't. They were getting off and like, oh, we're not going to do anything. So some things are happening, but there are so many laws and rules and structures that are keeping people oppressed, and it's keeping people who are like rich or who are white, they not impacted the same way by the same laws and rules. So, yeah.
I would also say, and Milton, you did a beautiful job of explaining that, systemic racism goes all the way back to the founding of this country and before. One of the things that I'm having to do with so many people is revisit history. Because in reality, when you think about the Constitution of the United States of America, it did not have us in mind. We were founded as a country on a flawed foundation in terms of who was going to have equality, who things were going to work for and who they were not going to work for. And what so many people don't understand, and it just, there are a lot of things that make me really angry, but one of the things that does make me really angry is sort of the pull yourself up by your bootstraps comments, and Martin Luther King addressed that beautifully when he said, it is cruel jest to expect a man who has no boots to pull himself up by his bootstraps. There have been so many systems that have been put in place to prevent us from being able to prevail. And yet we have, and yet we have continued to move ahead in spite of the obstacles that have been put in our path. So that in itself is a miracle to me, because we don't get to navigate the same road. And, if I can give you a visual, it's like climbing a mountain. And on one side of the mountain, there are, the crevices, the grooves where you can put your feet and your hands and you can pull yourself up. But it appears that on our side of the mountain, they forgot to put the grooves in. So we're trying to get up a slick surface to the top, and many of us have managed to do amazingly well. And we will continue to do that. But it's not an even playing field. In fact, our playing field is littered with landmines, because we never know what day we're going to step out the door and we're going to step on one of those landmines and we're going to lose our lives. And that is a horrible way to have to live.
I mean, some of those landmines is like Arbery, who was running, literally jogging in his neighborhood. Dr. E. husband experienced the same thing. Jogging in your own neighborhood, and you get shot and killed by somebody who, just because they don't like the color of your skin and have assumed somehow that you're automatically some criminal, and you just shot and killed for no reason. You're not armed, anything. A policeman. I look at a policeman wrong, I could be dead. And so I have a text thread with some friends from high school, all of us guys, we're just kind of in that kind of brothers. And we never really get to that vulnerable state, that real soft state, raw state. And when these things have been coming up, to see some of the most open-hearted text and emotions in there. And it's I love y'all. They don't even care about us at all. And I understand, I hope all of y'all live, but I may die today. I may die tomorrow. Not just die, be killed. There's a difference. from like, God may take me any day, all this type of stuff. But no, it's like someone may literally kill me because of the color of my skin. Okay, so policemen. So we're talking about police brutality. That's one example. Another example, if you are not killed by policemen, the prison system, the court system, that's another one. Then housing, we talk about redlining. We're talking about, it's a lot of examples of like the different ways that we're talking about like these structures are in place. So I know you're trying to get the examples out. So redlining with housing, we're talking about the prison industrial complex. We're talking about trying to think of all the different ones. It's so many. Boating. Oh my goodness. They've stopped black people from boating so many times. They literally just did it in Georgia. Like they're still doing this. And then all of a sudden, you're seeing people in California 50 miles apart being hung by a tree, and police are saying that these black people, it's a suicide. No, hanging yourself, suicide, black people, they don't, There's something fishy to that. Then in Florida, you got the young lady who died down there who was fighting for, anti-racism. She's killed and found, her body is found. Like, it's so many different things. And those are some of the extreme ones, but there's so many subtle ones too. Stop and frisk in New York. You're talking about, if your pants are sagging a little bit, I can stop you and frisk you real quick just because I see you sagging. Like, it's just rules and laws that they make all of a sudden that affect just certain people, black people, and meant to like keep them in prison and below, and not to grow and be better. So
yeah, I think too, one of the things that I've been spending a lot of time because of people who I love who are close to me who see this very differently, and who are quick to say that we're responding purely based off of feeling, and that maybe the facts do not line up. And so it's interesting because I can clearly identify moments in my life, personal moments I've endured, but I was thinking about, what are the moments where I have been interacting with systemic racism, and what has that looked like in my life? And I don't have the stats in front of me. I was trying to pull them up, but I had at one point had Googled the advanced placement testing scores. There's a breakdown. I think it's the Department of Education. I can't find it right now, unfortunately, but it was a breakdown of how of students who score a 3 or higher, which is how you get college credit. And the disparity was like disgusting to me. It was like if you look at those numbers, and at first you say, okay, maybe the students just aren't performing the same amount. But then when you look into the numbers and saw the difference between how many black students even took the exam versus how many white students. And then I remember thinking, you have to pay, there's a price for AP classes. And is it really that black students are not as intelligent or not educationally on the same level as their white students, And I just think that is absolute baloney. And it's interesting to me because when I was going into high school, I had been recommended to go into a few honors level classes, which was in my school, it was college prep. It was general was, you had, some academic difficulties. College prep was kind of the standard, and then honors level. And I met with my guidance counselor who told me that I shouldn't do it, that I should do all college prep classes because my A's would turn to B's, B's would turn to C's, C's would turn to D's, and I'd be failing. That when I went to high school, the pool would be much larger and I wouldn't perform the same way. And I remember being really distraught by that. I had gone on honor roll and high honors all through middle school, but I'm thinking, okay, yeah, she's right. I don't want to fail. I want to go to college and want to make sure I'm on par, And so I listened to her. I obliged. In my junior year, I remember my teacher, one of my teachers was like, why are you in college prep classes? You need to be in honors and APs. Why are you here? You're clearly performing above where you should be. And I explained the thing, and she's like, nope, next year. She's like, I'm going to make sure you go to the right classes. And my hometown is 97. I think it's really in the high 90s% white. But in my college prep courses, there were all kids, all of the minorities who were in those classes, And I remember going to my first honors level class and looking around and seeing it was all white kids and one Asian girl. And I remember thinking, is this the only reason I wasn't allowed in this, in honors level classes? And it's hard because I don't know the answer to that. I don't know what percentage my ethnicity played in this. But when you look at certain numbers, like those who are scoring high in AP classes, you have to ask yourself the question, what is happening here?
want to actually recommend a listening for folks, which is Podcast Radio Lab did a series called G about general intelligence, and they give some of the specifics about how these things were designed. And some of the questions on there, for instance, were moral questions. And like there was a question, if you find a wallet on the street, what do you do? And the white kid says, well, you pick it up and you try and find a police officer, or you try and give it to someone to return it. The black students were saying, you leave it alone. And so they were not getting credit for that answer. But they're saying, no, if I pick it up, then I could be accused of stealing it. So it's the moral thing for me to do is to leave it alone and to not pick it up and return it. And so like people don't understand the subtlety that is baked into that. Whether intentional or not, there's an experiential element of that gets stuck in there. And so I would definitely recommend people listening to Radiolab series on G.
And can I just add on to what you said, Jim and Tanisha? Education is one of the biggest ways that the system is failing poor and black kids, because we're talking about funding. A lot of times the funding does not come to the schools like they need them to. And so that changes everything. And you can go back through history. This is the same thing. This is all historical data. You can go back through history and see the way that they changed it. So when black people start moving into the inner city, white people start moving out, so did the money for the schools. So did the money for the schools. And this impacts the ability to be able to get the resources you need to educate people. So that's another issue, and that's a whole nother thing that deals with systemic racism. It's the money that's not going into the areas that really need it.
And to add to that, because people don't know how to connect the dots correctly, it goes so far back, and if you don't know your history, and if you didn't ever learn the history of our nation and of us as a people and what has happened, very often, I would say for all of us that are on this call, we have lived in a world where we have been in situations frequently where we are the only black person in the room. That is not an uncommon circumstance for us to find ourselves in. And actually, it happens often enough that we know how to what we call code switch. We know how to behave, how to interact in our world and, of course, in the white world. I would love to say that it is one world, but it is not. It is two different worlds. And there is an expectation that if you are a black person, if you're a black indigenous person of color, and of course we know if you're a person of color at all, there is a expectation that you actually conform to the white world. You have to do that if you're going to be able to go to a certain kind of school. You have to do that if you're going to get a job. You have to do that if you're going to be promoted in any way, shape, or form. So the whole system is set up through a white lens. When you look at your founding fathers, they don't look like us. And that's not to say that we're not grateful to be in this country. We're not grateful to understand that in the United States of America, there are opportunities that do not exist in many other places. However, those opportunities are not equally allocated for us, particularly as Black, Indigenous people of color. And, when Milton was talking about redlining, so I'm the only one on the call that, can just break that down for you. I grew up in New York City. I grew up during a time where redlining was so active, even in New York, that if you were a Black person, you could not get a mortgage. And one of the ways that I was able to get ahead, and my family got ahead, and my brother, we all we got a really good education, and we've been successful. But what we had to go through, and what our parents had to go through in order to create those opportunities, we were able to get out of the inner city, and we were able to move out to Hollis, Queens. So we were able to live in, one of the nice boroughs in a fairly nice neighborhood, because my father could get a mortgage because he worked for a period of time for the one organization that if you worked for the railroad, you could apply for a mortgage. So Black people can actually go back and look at different things that have happened historically, and we can see where the moment of access occurred that allowed some of us to move ahead, and why so many other people were unable to get to move ahead, that could not break the cycle of poverty and poor education and no access to opportunity. So, some people got a little bit of a window, and believe me, we ran through it if you got it. But if you did not get that window of opportunity, you were trapped. And that's what we still need to look at today, is that so many of our brothers and sisters are trapped through no fault of their own. And that is what people do not connect the dots about.
Yeah, and I think in a very just anecdotal way of explaining this that I was able to share with one of my friends is that, I had a fairly difficult upbringing and found myself homeless at 16. And yet being here today, I have a college education, I have a job, a car, I've been able to fight and figure things out. And when I look back, I'm so grateful for all the white people who got me to where I am today. And it's so unfortunate that I can't name a single Black man or woman who was able to help me in the same capacity. And I just think that is a shame that because of this same idea of there are certain times when you have certain moments of access, but the vast majority of us have not necessarily seen those options. And so we're not even around necessarily or in the place to be able to assist those who may need a leg up.
Well, I would love to hear some more stories and experiences as we continue on through some of these questions. Feel free to drop them in. One of the turning points I have felt I've had with some white people in the conversations about race who are having a hard time understanding that racism exists is when I leave the individual nameless, but I refer to someone that I know, a friend of mine, a person of color, and I say they've entrusted a story to me, and I can't tell you who they are, but here was their experience of experiencing racism. And when I share that story, it is very often that's when that's when it clicks for them. Like, really? Yes. And this person, if I were to mention them, them, but they've never shared this with you because most of the time we're not asking, or we're not close enough in relationship. Never mind asking. We're not close enough in relationship with them for them to feel comfortable, right? To actually trust us with these stories. And so that's been very helpful, is hearing some of these. So if you're game enough or you feel safe enough to do so, I'd love to hear some more of those. And I think that would be helpful to folks out there. But let's talk about your thoughts on moving from self to social awareness and that trajectory. We had talked about this on our podcast on race back a year ago. And it was towards the end of that podcast that we really got to this space of talking about how there's a difference between this self and social awareness. And I'd love to have you talk a bit about that. It's funny, when I've mentioned it to white people, it's like, what is that, self to social awareness? But when I have this conversation with people of color, it's yes, that's my life. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about that. What is that self-awareness and social awareness, and maybe say a bit about that.
So I'll speak a little bit on it. So W.E.B. Du Bois, in the souls of let me see, Black Folks. I think that's the name of it. But he talks about a double consciousness, where there's an understanding, as everyone has, as a natural consciousness of how the world impacts me and how I internalize it and see it. But as a Black person in this country, I understand my Blackness does something in society, and I have to be aware of it. And so that's a whole nother level of, and I think that's some of the hardest work. It's like, how do I make sure like I am myself, but then also dealing with how I impact every area. This is what Dr. E was talking about when we go somewhere, code switching. I like trying to be myself wherever I want to go. I don't have that luxury yet in this country. You know, in certain places, I have to smile a little bit more. I tell my mentees when we go into a restaurant or somewhere, I say, just smile. Like, just give them a smile and try to disarm people who automatically would think of you as a threat. It's a lot of small things I tell them. I was like, when we go here, we need to do this before we go. When we do this, make sure you say this. And it's because there's this awareness of our Blackness and what it does to other people. And so even when they're younger, I'm trying to teach them because they just have to be careful and have to be aware of it. And honestly, there's even some clients I work with who say, is it even worth having a conversation? Because there's people who are super educated, polite, respond well in situations, and they're still being endangered. So it is this awareness. And I guess like I didn't realize I had it until a Black person, until I had friends who were white who's like, you have to do all that? You think about all that? Yeah. Before I do all that, I think about where I'm going and how my Blackness impacts everything around me and the people and the group. So I have to account for that on top of accounting for my natural personality. I'm a 7, you know, the energy, the buzz I bring. But I always got to account for this Blackness as well, too, in different circles and situations, because it impacts rooms in different ways that can be really harmful or detrimental to my growth or my health.
So one of the things, there's so many things that I could share about this, because part of that whole concept, you have to look at how early did you really discover that these two things were happening, that there was your sense of self, and then there was an external socialization, a social self that had to happen. And this is a really hard story for me to tell, but, you know, it happened for me when I was somewhere between the age of 4 and 5 years old. And my grandmother lived in Alabama. And we flew from New York to Alabama, but we had to change planes in Montgomery. Once we landed in Alabama, my mother sort of changed. And I noticed the change in her, but I didn't know what it was about. And we went into the airline terminal, and she started brushing my hair, and she put this hat on me, and she looked at me, kind of gave me a really loving look, and she said, go in there and go to the bathroom. Do what you need to do, wash your hands, and come right back out. And I said, aren't you coming with me? And she said, no, I'll just be right here. Just run in and do what you need to do. And when I came back out, my mother was standing on the side up against the wall. And my mother was a 7, so she was a very glamorous, flamboyant, larger than life presence woman. And she had, on the plane, she had on a big hat and she had on sunglasses. And when I came out, her hat was off, her sunglasses were off, and her head was down. And she looked small and different. And I walked over to my mother and I said, Mama, what's wrong? And she said, I just need to get out of here. And I took her hand and I said, then let's get out of here. And I led my mother. I literally led my mother out of the terminal, and I just kept holding her hand, like I was giving her strength. Because what my mother had done was she had passed me off as white so that I could go to the white bathroom, and so that she would not be putting me at risk. She sort of played the role of my nanny. And I knew in that moment as a little girl, there was something really wrong with having to experience my mother's shame, the loss of her dignity in that moment, having to sacrifice that in order to just have her child go to a clean bathroom. And that stayed with me. I honestly believe that it is probably one of the reasons that I do all of the social justice work that I do today, because that has never left me. As I go through the world, I look at all of these things that happen. I mean, for instance, my husband and I will go to a really nice restaurant. Thank God we can afford to sometimes go to really nice restaurants. However, my husband, who grew up in the South, he has a different sense of self than I do. It appears to me that in the South, there's this whole sort of code around live and let live. You stay over there, we'll stay over here, and there won't be any trouble. I grew up in New York City. I'm kind of like, I'm going to go where I want to go. And you need to be okay with it because my money is green just like everybody else's. And so when we married and we would sometimes go out to dinner and my husband would say, I hate this experience. And I'm thinking, what's to hate? The food's great. The atmosphere is beautiful. We've got ambiance. We're just alone together. But he would notice how people would be staring at us. That wasn't something that was first on my radar, but I began to notice it. And when we would leave the restaurant, my sense of self still pretty much intact, and I'm feeling good. I've had a good meal. We might get to the elevator, and a white couple invariably would come over and say something like, sir, what team do you play for? And I'm thinking, what do you mean, what team does he play for? What team? My husband is 5'10". He's not 6'6". What team do you play for? Or, oh, I know you sing with that group. I can't remember the name of the group, but I know who you are. It is hard to hold on to your inner sense of self and keep that intact when the social world that you go out into constantly has you under attack. We call it microaggressions. I like to refer to it as daily indignities, because there is barely a day that goes by that something doesn't happen, that someone, and I'm not going to say that people are intentionally doing it, because this is all part of the implicit bias. This is part of that software that's operating in the background. But when these things happen over and over and over again, once again, that's part of what makes it exhausting. If one more person looks at my husband and asks him, what team does he play for? What singing group is he in? Oh, you work at a hospital. What do you do there? There's never the assumption that he's a doctor, and he's a very humble 9 Enneagram type man. He does not lead with, I'm a doctor at the hospital. He doesn't need to do that. But it is a very difficult process to do our inner work, maintain our sense of self when it's under attack on a daily basis when we go out into the social world. So I would even say, even in terms of looking at how the Enneagram works for people of color, there's an additional lens there. There's something else that's going on that isn't commonly taught, but that those of us who are Black, Indigenous people of color and people of color across the board know that there's some additional work that we're having to do all the time.
To go off what Dr. E had said, it's interesting to understand how you operate in different environments, whether it's in social settings or last summer I brought a group of kids that I mentor to the beach. It's this really nice little beach in Swampscott, which is a more white area. It's actually very Jewish, but we're at the beach and, you know, we're laughing, having a good time. And I know that this beach is typically one where you're not going to find people who aren't white there. But we go because less waves, whatever. And the kids are having so much fun. And I had one girl who was 12 years old, one girl who was 17. And the 17-year-old was like, you could tell she was like kind of shaken up, you know. And I was like, hey, everything okay? And she's like, we're being too loud. We're being too loud. It's we need to calm down. Like someone's gonna get upset with us. And I'm very much in the same way, Dr. E from New England, where I'm like, let them, like, not that I would never be that aggressive in a white space about it. But they're like, it's fine. We're at the beach. Like, this is what kids do, you know? And she just was hyper aware of the fact that we were the only people of color in the whole beach and what that means for us. And then there's this little white boy who had like a cooler and he was selling popsicles. And we watched him go to every one of the areas except for ours. And it was just interesting because, you know, the 12-year-old was like, oh, he must know everyone from this neighborhood. And we're like, yeah, maybe. Like, we don't want to be the ones to tell her that it could be that he happens to know every single person who's here, or it could be that he doesn't feel comfortable coming over to us. And then in professional settings, one of the things that I have been the most aware of in terms of social awareness is how I am so blessed to be Black and educated and to be a strong, I think, fierce woman. I think I'm glad to be who I am and to have been able to embrace all of me. But it's interesting because there are some spaces that I know I have to, not only do I have to code switch, but I have to adjust who I am, because the minute they know that, like, I don't know, that I will speak up or that I, will stand for things, the minute that I will get labeled as that Black girl. And when Ahmaud Arbery, when everything went down, I noticed a lot of churches in the area weren't saying anything, and it hurt me to my core that these are supposed to be places of safety, of refuge, and yet something horrible happens and you're waiting to see more information before you can say this is not okay, you know? And I was so bothered by it. Like 2 days, 3 days goes by, and I'm like, why are the churches not saying anything? And so to those that I'm connected to, I was like, I have to say something. So I wrote a letter just saying, hey, like, I hate to be that person, but like, I knew the minute I said it that I was going to be the one that everyone is going to, and it happened. I got a ton of people, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak on this kind of stuff, but I'm also aware that I probably will always be the Black voice, which I don't even feel qualified to represent all of Black America or educated enough. But even before this moment, I've been doing my job now for about 7 years full time. And when I get asked to speak at kids ministry things, it's not about leadership or team development or communicating. It's always about, how do we have diversity? How do we help kids to feel comfortable? And like, how do we make our churches more inclusive? And just being aware that being Black is a gift, and I'm glad to speak up, but it's not the only thing I want to be in your mind, you know? And just recognizing that the different environments we're in and how we have to make the choice. Are we going to be that Black person, or are you going to, kind of fall back into the shadows? Because it feels like there's only two options a lot of times.
I heard so many things that I can't even speak on all of them, to be honest. But one of the things is, I did some work with a consultant with the Fortune 100 company, and one of the first ground level things they laid down before we did the Enneagram, introduced it, was psychological safety. Here's another issue. When a person of color says their experience, it is as if for a lot of white people that experience doesn't happen and can't happen. That's not real, or that's just out of the blue. Like, there is a space where it's a percentage that they just don't believe what we're saying. And so that's the ground level of, like, if you can't even believe what I'm saying, how can I get to the next level of actually explaining myself, explaining the system, explaining history? You've got to at least try to understand, at least hear what I'm saying and say, maybe it's true. I haven't experienced it, but maybe it is true. So that's one of the ground level things I thought of. Some of the experiences, because I live in the South, been in the South, still in the South, and I have gotten so used to it that, like, the other night I was trying to think of stories, and then when I actually allowed myself to go back, I just kept thinking of more and more and more stories of where I've experienced racism. I am so used to it. I am so used to not responding to it in a way that probably needs to be responded to, because, like Tanisha said, being labeled that angry black guy and that type of thing, like, oh, he's just an angry black man, I don't know, and it's like, I can be angry, that's okay. Like, so it's constantly having to already adjust myself and say, okay, wait, if I come off like that, then they're going to put me in this box and I'm not going to be heard. So I'm going to have to be aware of what I'm doing. Many experiences of people saying, when I was in college or in an atmosphere, it says, oh, are you an athlete? What sport do you play? Just like you were saying, oh my goodness. Oh, all the time. And I'm 6'1", slim, but it's like, do you play basketball for the school? Is that why you're here? Like, wow, no, I'm here because I worked hard to get here. That's why I'm here. And then on top of that, other experiences where being educated or being black and educated, it's like, oh, you talk like a white guy. You talk like a white person. And it's like, what? And then when you go around your white friends or white colleagues and mates, it's like, oh, you're such an aggressive black person. You talk so good. So it's just like this balance of trying to say, who in the world, and figure out as a black person, who are you? That's hard because you have so many different layers of you trying to make it, trying to grow, and trying to manage yourself. So it's this balance. And I've seen a lot of black guys in college struggle with trying to impress and put on like a good show for like the white people or their white friends to see them make it, but then also try to be like extra black in themselves. So they had this real stretch in themselves, this real psychological warfare going on inside themselves. And I've seen it destroys black people trying to make it. And then on top of that, another experience that I could think of while y'all were speaking, there's just so many. In high school, we were at an event, and I think we were talking about kind of building bonds, diversity, inclusion, what Tanisha was talking about and everything. And one thing that's super important, I had got excited. We were talking about like the different things. It was a group of us. It was probably like 4 black people, 4 white people. It was a group of us, and we were talking. I was excited. And I reached my hand out to shake a hand of this white girl who was across from me, and she jumped back as if like I was punching, as if I was throwing something. She jumped back as if I was going to hurt her. And automatically that scarred me because it's like, wow, we've been having this conversation. I've been talking. We're here to try to bridge the gap. And I literally reached across the aisle to shake your hand, not aggressively, nothing like that. And you jumped back for fear of me somehow. So it's been like a whole lot of experiences like that have made up my life. I think the 7-ness has helped me. Parents, God, all these things, the opportunity, the window that Dr. Egerton talked about. Like, I've been blessed to have those small slivers and actually been able to get through them. But that's not the case for a lot of black people in our country.
This is why my life at this point is dedicated to mentoring young people of color, because I know that my generation stands on the shoulders of the generation that came before me. And I know that were it not for the civil rights movement, if it was not for the fact that people were willing to sacrifice their lives, we wouldn't even be where we are now. I wouldn't have the education that I have. I wouldn't have had the opportunities that I was given. But there's something that I want to make very clear, and I think that this will be very helpful to many white people who want to be our allies. And that is, we got stuck at tolerance. So when everyone was told you have to practice tolerance, we're just going to have to deal with the fact that black and white sort of kind of have to be together, and we're going to have to figure this out, but we just have to have tolerance. And people who got to the point of tolerance felt like they had made the whole journey. Well, tolerance was just the first step. Tolerance is not acceptance. It is not inclusion. And it's really not even love. And so one of the reasons that I feel so good about being Black is that in spite of what has been done to me or my family personally, in spite of what I see happening to my brothers and sisters around the world, I've never lost that capacity to love. And I do not hate white people. I'm like, I'll pick up the phone and call one of my white friends and say, hey, dude, have you seen what's happening in the world? Why haven't you called to check on me? Well, Deborah, we didn't think you were out there being. It doesn't mean that you don't check on me because you think I was the one that got shot. Check on my heart. Check and see how I'm feeling in this moment. And just say, hey, I saw what's happening. I love you. I got your back. That means so much. And, there's something that I look at, and racism leads to death. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. Racism leads to death. But silence also leads to death. Because as long as people remain silent, racism will be perpetuated and people will continue to die. That's why I'm willing to talk to anybody about anything and say, hey, we've got to find a better way. Because the hardest thing for me to hear, I do racial healing sessions, and I bring Black people together first and to heal their hearts, and so that we can heal and we can be in a space that is safe and just talk about how we're feeling. And then I bring the white allies in who want to stand with us, and I allow them to listen to our stories and also to hear what being a white ally looks like and feels like for us. But the hardest thing to listen to is what Milton said a few moments ago when he said, I'm used to it. This is my life. I almost expect it. When the police took my husband down, he had what I call a non-reaction. For any Black person to have to live in this world and have the expectation that eventually that's going to happen to them, and just to go numb to it or accept it as part of our normal, that's messed up. There's just no other way to put it. That's just totally messed up. So when I hear a Black man say, it's inevitable, I know it's going to happen to me eventually, that just literally, I can't breathe. When I hear that, I can't breathe.
Going from self to social awareness, and it's interesting because I've talked to a lot of my white friends, and my mom is one of 3 kids, 3 adopted children to a family of 5 biological children who are all white. We have a huge, very large family, and none of my white family members have reached out to me or asked, except for my sister. I have a half sister who's half Korean. We share a mom, and her other half is white. And she had reached out to me. She called me, and because one of her Black friends kind of went off on her for not saying anything to her. And she was like, like, I didn't realize that something happening to this other person, that you felt it the same way. Like, I didn't realize that it was something that mattered to you. Like, of course, it's like sad that this person died, but she's like, I didn't know till my friend told me. And, that's something that I think is really interesting, because it's a very Western way of thinking that we're all very individuals, right? Like, you do your thing. You are like, your circumstances, whatever, doesn't matter. You just do you. But when I see Black people dying, I can't separate it from me. They are me. They represent me and my family and my dad and my brothers. And it's interesting because, like, the more that I've been having this conversation with the white people in my life, the more that I realize, like, oh, they don't feel the same way. Like, this is why people don't understand why I'm obsessed and I adore Michelle Obama. Even though there's some things politically I will never get behind her on, like, I will forever champion her because she is an incredible Black woman. And if she can do it, I can, right? Like, but I understand now why a lot of my white friends and family members haven't called me, because they didn't realize that it was personal, even though I don't know these people. I probably will never meet anyone in their family, but it still is me in a way that I think is really inseparable.
Thank you so much.
To move from just Enneagram, it's great because we're reaching an Enneagram aware community. That's who listens to us mostly. And it's great that we're doing a lot of sort of self-awareness and growth in that space. But why we've become real passionate about moving from that to social awareness and social transformation. And we need to do this and hear each other as a way to actually move towards that, where how I am as a white man and the way I behave impacts other people. I've had to have that conversation with my wife, how do I impact you? And, that's those are the conversations I think that are really important to be having. And so I really appreciate what you said, Dr. E, and when you spoke to this issue of moving from tolerance to something deeper. And that's what I've been really hoping to hear more of, is how do because I want to move more into love. And I think there's a lot of others out there who want to be more loving. And so moving from just tolerance to actual relationship, and that's where I see some hope. And I wonder where, there are other means of transformation than this piece. But I'd like to hear maybe a little bit about that what can we do and how can we move forward in a way that's actually helpful as a community. And that's been a lot of your work, Dr. E. You and I have talked about this, and I deeply appreciate that. So I'd love to hear from you and Tanisha and Milton as well.
Well, what I would say about getting from tolerance to love is stepping outside of your comfort zone. So the first thing you can do, and I tell white people this all the time, pick up your phone and look at your contact list. And how many people of color, how many Black people are in your contacts? How many people have you gotten to know? Now, the opportunities are all around us because, we're not living in a totally segregated world anymore. So you work with Black people, you meet Black people at concerts. If you take a vacation, you're going to run into a couple of Black couples. I mean, we're out there. We're not hiding under rocks. We are there. But to take the opportunity to try and broaden your circle of relationship, because where things get better is when you are in relationship with people. When it becomes personal, for instance, as frightening as the incident was when my husband was handcuffed and thrown on the ground and all that stuff, the white people that know us had a simultaneous reaction, which was, that couldn't have happened to Dr. Egerton. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. So it's almost like it confuses the brain cells. It's like, no. This is only happening to the criminals, the thugs, the drug abusers, the drug dealers. That's who that happens to. When you get to know us as a people and come to care about us individually and then collectively as a people, that's how we move to love. But it happens based on relationship. I have so many white allies, I can't even count them. And I feel good about that because they are people who I have cultivated relationships, and in some cases, I've done most of the work. It's like, you're going to like me whether you want to or not, because that's kind of how I show up. And so they are in relationship with me, and so they care about me, my family, my children, my grandchildren. We have to develop relationships, and the main thing is to start having the tough conversations. As Black people, we have to call out our white friends and say, hey, you're my friend. However, saying that you're not a racist, and I know you're not, is not enough. You really have to move into active anti-racism. And that's what we need to have happening. So it's about relationship. It's not about just words. It means moving into action and becoming an active anti-racist, because Black people did not create slavery. Black people are not going to undo slavery. Drop the mic.
I was muted, but I was like, damn.
It's true.
Wow, that's so good. Yeah, thank you guys so much for speaking up on that. Because I'm an 8 and a challenger, like there's this challenge that's going through my head, because I've heard from white friends them say that the disbelief. They don't really believe. And they're like, I have friends who are people of color, and I don't, like, they've never told me these stories. Just consider if you're a safe enough person for them to share that story with. Y'all can't see, everyone's head is nodding. That's one thing you can't see on a podcast.
Yeah. And I think in addition to that, Dr. E, what it looks like practically, the thing that I am the most appreciative of experiencing in these last few weeks are the white people in my life who have gone out of their way to ask for accountability in this area. And that's one thing that I feel like is so, I might cry, so moving right now, is that the people who, because we do get used to the microaggressions. We get used to being and existing in predominantly white spaces. And so they make jokes, or like little biases come out here, a little bit of prejudice here. Oh, like, yeah, like I'm friends with Black people, but I would never I'm not attracted to Black people. I would never date a Black guy. Like, you get used to that, and you just kind of have to make the choice. Am I going to speak up or not? And I'm so grateful for the white people in my life who've called me and said, hey, have I ever said anything that made you feel unsafe? Or if I say something, can you tell me? And just having that permission, I think, is incredibly valuable, because I know now who are my allies. I know that if I am in a house, this happened to me where I was at a family's house. They're a white family, huge house. They're kind of the epitome of privilege. And I remember sitting there, and one of the kids was making a joke and using Asian, a fake Asian accent, and made comments about these Mexicans in their school and whatever. And I remember feeling so uncomfortable and unsafe, and I'm never going over your house again. I will never talk to you. It just was oh, you're one of those people kind of thing for me. And having that family reach out and ask, and actually be willing to say hey, no, if you're comfortable and you want to come over, we just don't know. And we're now aware of how little we know. And I don't know if I'll go over there. And I don't know if I'll put myself in that place to be the one to educate them. But I think that is such a helpful response, is just being willing to allow us to say something. Because I think the other thing I would add to it is that it feels to me as though a lot of white people assume that white or predominant culture is the norm, and what is okay and acceptable and anything else is bad or different. And it's been, I just have been really pleased to see the people who have acknowledged that it's okay for you to be Black and not make music and not do sports, right? And to finally like have people acknowledge that being Black can mean whatever we want it to mean, and given permission to exist as a Black person in white spaces. And I don't know, in terms of response, I think that is really helpful.
Well, going back to your question of kind of what can allies do, one of my biggest things is first educate yourself. That's going to be huge. Because if you understand the education and the history behind these things, it will start to make way more sense, and you will start to understand and want to move towards actually making a change more and more if you can understand actually what's going on. So educate yourself. There are plenty of resources, like plenty of resources out there. You just got to be willing to get them and look. And one of my good friends, some white people started asking, like, what can I do? Like where do I get books? It's like, go Google it. You have to be careful, but what you find. But like Google works really well. Siri works well. Like it works really well. You don't have to go to your local Black person to find like the best resources. It's not bad, but in times when we're tired, just open up Google and find some of the best books. Amazon does a great job of linking them and ranking them. Okay. White Fragility is up there. That's one of the books. I'm telling you, it's a pretty good one. If you haven't got it, you should get it. Besides that, you're going to have to sacrifice. I think this is the one thing that people in the civil rights movement understood that we may not understand, is that you have to sacrifice for things to be changed. And what I mean by sacrifice, like where you spend your money, where you spend your time, the things you watch. So if you are putting money towards a company or a product that is not supporting the things that you are moving towards or want to like get rid of, then you can't put your money there. So you can't put your money in these big economical places, these companies that do not agree with treating Black people as equal. Like you can't put your money there. So you got to sacrifice. I mean, you may not be able to get every single thing like you wanted it before. That's just what happens, right? Until that company does right or fixes that, we have to find ways. We have to sacrifice. That's one of the ways we have to sacrifice. Invest in your local and your Black businesses. Super important. Another thing is, and I have an issue with this when it comes to Enneagram in some areas and some teachers. The Enneagram is inner work, but it's also outer work. If your inner work isn't driving you to be effective outwardly towards your community and the people around you, you're not doing the real work. You are not doing the real work, and it's not really helping you or your community. So if you're not doing that, then I have a total issue and a total problem with it, because you're not helping anybody. You're not doing anything. You're not really helping yourself, because in those experiences outside of who you are and everybody who looks like you, you're going to get like this friction and tension that you will not normally get by just being around yourself and people who are just like you. So you get this tension that helps you to figure out what is going on inside of me. How do I deal with this? How do I come up? What are these questions I need to ask myself, right? So that is why it's super important to like actually the inner work drive you to be doing the outer work as well. It should be simultaneous. Like your life should be reflecting of the changes you want to see as you do this inner work and you grow and you understand more. Because if it's not, you're not doing much. You're just talking or you're just posting. Like I need you to actually be action oriented. That's what makes the difference. 2 of my good friends, I have 4 best friends. I have a small circle, 2 white, 2 Black. My 2 white friends, one of them is working on, he wrote a letter to try to take off a man who's a segregationist, a racist guy off a building at a college we went to. And he did a change.org. He did a petition, got 16,000 people. And like, he is working on doing that. That is the work. That is the work I'm talking about. And he mentioned, he's not the person who started it, but he mentioned the people, the Black association there. He mentioned them. He said, I didn't start this. I'm just putting kind of a notes to it to empower it to get here. Right. So those are the things. My other friend, Corey, he's on Facebook, so you have your social media warriors, right? But he's connected to a whole bunch of white people who do not agree with basically human rights. Like, we're not talking about nothing special. Black Lives Matter. We just saying we matter. We ain't even asking for anything else. It's like, just don't kill us. That's the ground floor of what we're asking for. So if you're looking at that, he's on there and he is literally combating the arguments with beautiful logical ways and beautiful statements. Like, because he's deep, rich, he's a 5, right? So he's thinking, complex thinking, and his wife is a 9. They're both on there. And I mean, they are warriors on there, letting people know, like, no, that's not right. Like, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? Is there even a spiritual or biblical way that you are defending your point? Which there's not most of the time. So there is just like, that's how you do it. You act, you be active in your community. So, and getting out. So that's a part of a lot of what I had to say. I do have hope for the future. I have not seen a time like this where I've seen so many white people reach out to me and apologize or say, are you okay? And actually notice, like, oh crap, something's really wrong. Like, this is really messed up. This is going over and over again. And what I want is all white people, especially the ones who want to be allies or who are quote unquote not racist. You have to be active. Don't wait for the black person you do know die before you understand that, oh, this is real. Botham Jean, who died down in Texas, and a cop came in his apartment and shot him, and when he was eating a bowl of ice cream, that's my friend. So, like, I have friends from the college we went to who were white, and it was like, oh, I finally get it. Like, it makes sense. This guy's doing nothing but good and great things in his life, and he gets shot in his home with a police officer. So, like, it woke some of those students up to be like, oh, this brutality is real against black people, police brutality. Yes, stop waiting. You cannot wait. You know, more people will die. Stop waiting until that one black person in your life dies and that you think is a good black person and say, oh, I should act now. No, start now so we can prevent so many of these deaths. And remember, this is a humanity issue. It's not just a black versus white, a racist versus another. It's a humanity issue at the core, humanity issue. So that's part of what I have. I'm going to let someone else speak because I'm just a little fired up. Sorry.
Well, I love that you're fired up. And because you have people around you that you are letting that fire out with, that's actually helping. One of the things that I would say when we all look at what we need to be doing, I'm saying to my white friends, no more free passes. At the end of the day, we have to have these tough conversations because racism is going to come to everyone's door. And to Milton's point, if you wait until it comes to your door, it is too late. So you don't know who your best friend's going to marry, who your kids are going to marry. You don't know what your extended family is going to look like. My extended family now looks like the United Nations. You cannot wait for something horrible to happen and wait until it is so personal that you're trapped in grief and shame and loss. Grief and shame coming from the white community really doesn't do anything to help the problem. Grief and shame are really paralytics. They kind of freeze you in place. This is awful. I wish I could do something, but I don't know what to do. What to do is to actually do like Milton's friend who's trying to get that statue removed. On the last racial healing session that I had, I think it was last weekend, Milton, you were on the call with us. My son's college roommate, another 5, and he is like become this social warrior. And he has been on Facebook nonstop ever since, posting all kinds of resources, information, because he went to college with my son. They were roommates. And he cares about my son, he cares about us, he calls me mom. And so, getting people involved that care about us or that care about the preservation of humanity. Because when I say it's going to come to everyone's door, it is in some way, shape, or form. So we have to all be in this together. And as my husband so beautifully said, when there was the back and forth between Black Lives Matter and All Lives Matter, and my husband looked at me one day and he said, all lives won't matter until Black Lives Matter. How can you say all lives matter if Black lives don't? So it's even looking at the subtlety of that. People who are out there saying, no, it's not just Black lives, all lives matter. But is it okay for Black lives not to matter? Is it okay when the house is burning to call in the fire department and sprinkle some water on the other houses in the neighborhood and let the house that is burning just be consumed? So we have to look at the logical actions that we all need to make to step into this, because I do believe with all of my heart and soul, we can eradicate racism in our time. It's around the globe now that we're looking at it. And yes, there are some people that are never going to come on the journey. Okay, fine, But if enough of us are on that journey, then we just leave some people behind and we just keep moving forward. And we create a much kinder, better, lovable world.
What I love about what we're talking about here, a lot of things I love about this, but what I'm hearing is that there's both a systemic change that needs to take place, but also an internal change that needs to take place. And I love what I'm hearing because, in some of the debates, it's like it's all systems and everybody's becoming cause-driven. And we're losing the people, we're losing the soul, we're losing the heart, right? And I see your heads nodding, and this is what I want to get across to all of our listeners, is that it's not one or the other, it's both. And but to tune into our hearts, to tune in towards empathy, to listen to the stories, and to actually feel empathy, to feel something. Because part of what's happening is we're losing our souls, we're losing our hearts in a lot of this tension that exists, and for a lot of us, and you're describing the stories of white friends who have suddenly become activists because they're touched in their heart by the hurt of their friend who is a person of color. And that is, I think, that's what initially started me on this path, was hearing friend after friend. And I was blessed to have many friends of color who have been willing to share this with me and their own pain and their own journey. And when I heard that, I thought, I can't do it. I can't just sit there and listen to that any longer and not do anything. And, and I think that's going to be true for a lot of folks. And it is true for a lot of folks. So it's both system and our hearts that need to change. And so I just wanted to say thank you so very much for the treasure of your wisdom and your stories, your experiences with us here at the Art of Growth.
So a special thanks to our panel this week, Milton, Tanisha, Dr. E. And thank you all for joining us. Please check out more about our panelists in the show notes, including links to their work, and feel free to contact us about any questions you may have. We are so honored that you continue to join us and you let us be a part of your journey. And I'd like to invite you to take a step closer to the community, because the podcast is one thing, but the best part of this is the community and the incredible people that are in it, like the ones you just heard from and like the ones you've heard on some of the panels. There are incredible people who are in our group coaching sessions right now, and it is so amazing to get to know some of you a little bit more personally, to get on the inside of your stories, that we are sharing our stories with each other, and not just in this public setting, but in a more intimate, private, and confidential space with the group coaching. So if that's something that you would be interested in, please reach out. We can talk about it and figure out if it's right for you. You can also take our online Enneagram test at theartofgrowth.org. Reach out to us about corporate training, consulting, coaching, individual, family, whatever it is you need. Let's see if we can help in some way. Also, to take a small step toward the community, you can join our Facebook group, which is still called Enneagram Panels, because I can't change it for some reason. And you can join our Instagram, which is just called Art of Growth. This podcast is produced by me, Jim, at Talkie Record Studio in Lynn, Massachusetts. So subscribe to hear more of what's coming up. And if you leave a review on iTunes, it helps people find the show. Now, may you go out and may you be a part of justice rolling down like a river. May you rise in the spaces that you are called to walk, with the people you are called to walk with. May you be clear on yourself, both your shadow and your superpower, so that you can influence the world around you in a more positive, loving, healthy, growth-oriented way. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you next time. Grace and peace.